Hi, everyone. I'm Matthew Wickman, BYU, where I hold the university professorship in English. I'm talking today with Diana Villegas, who is a member of the SSCS and a longtime contributor. Diana is a trained psychotherapist, has worked for years in pastoral counseling, also an independent scholar who's published widely in the field and done all kinds of good work in the society. So, Diana, welcome. Good to see you.
Good to see you. I'm glad to be here with you.
So you know the exercise. I'm asking you 5 questions here, okay, about your work in society and what you've observed over the years and roles you've held and things you've published, that kind of thing. Let's begin here. How is it you found the society? How'd you learn about it? How'd you get involved with it?
Well, I became involved with the society first through its initial publication before Spiritus, the Journal of the Society, which is now 25 years old. Before that, the beginnings of the society, the group of people got together and published something called the Christian Spirituality or the Bulletin of Christian Spirituality. And so through colleagues, actually, I learned of that, obtained copies, and I was fascinated, intrigued, and actually helped in my scholarly unfolding by that publication. And especially in this respect, I've always been interested in sort of the identity of the field and methodology in the field. And I had had my beginnings way back in the Institute of Spirituality of the Gregorian University in Rome, which is, very traditional Roman Catholic institution that studied spirituality for many, many, many years from a historical perspective, somewhat theological, but traditional. Moved over to the Fordham Theology Department, which at that time had a specialty in the history of Christian spirituality. So the methodology I learned was primarily textually based and historically oriented. So then this reflection about the identity of the field, where the primary focus was on the individual and their experience, where questions were being asked about what methods should we use, was very interesting to me and allowed me to think more broadly about the discipline. And from then on, then I became a member of the society and started to interact with different colleagues and really have found my belonging to it very supportive to my scholarship and to know colleagues also for relationships, collegial relationships that have become global.
You bet. Good. Okay. Well, I know you as a member of the society for many years and a major contributor to it. And I know you as a scholar who's worked a lot on Catherine of Siena, the 14th century mystic. Um, how did you get involved with working on Catherine of Siena? Was it that you saw that work hadn't been done and you might do it, or was there something else that drew you to Catherine personally?
Well, I was first drawn to Catherine personally. I was attracted to her personality. And what's interesting about that, and that, by the way, was way back when I was studying history of spirituality at the Gregorian University in Rome. But what drew me to her in this context, that Catherine has been mostly known as a mystic or has been studied as a mystic. And so people study her extraordinary experiences, her extraordinary asceticism, and so on. But what drew me to her was not that. What drew me to her was her story, that she is the last daughter in a huge family of a medieval merchant in Siena at a time when girls like this were not educated. Like maybe by the time she was 20, she learned a little bit of reading. Perhaps at some point before her death, she learned to write, but we don't think so. Some of us don't think so. And this person became someone who was able to speak truth to power and be a prophetic voice at the highest political levels of church and state, and this being the Middle Ages, church and state were intertwined. And that happened because she was able to be receptive to the power of God acting in a person. And she never became a nun either, so that she reached that level of prophetic capacity was just fascinating to me. Then, as I read her, I became interested in the scholarly possibilities, and eventually, with my ability to read Italian and maybe some more knowledge of the culture, well, to some extent, I realized that I could make some contributions. So the scholarly opportunities also became a reason to pursue studying her and writing about her.
Okay, good. Leads me to my third question, actually, because you've written about her quite a bit, and you write about her with a great deal of nuance, right? So you've written, for example, about how there was a kind of an idealistic, almost an absolutist streak in Catherine that rendered her at times a little inflexible to responding to contexts and to situations in the world, and it may have rendered her undiscerning of God in some ways. I find that really interesting in your work. What in her work, and there's a warning in that, by the way, for everybody, not to be too inflexible about how we hold to our positions and our ideals. But what in her might be an example of the thing that we might actually look to her for a source, as a source of emulation? What might draw us to her usefully, fruitfully in our modern world?
Yeah, well, in terms of her broader spirituality, I think she has a spirituality about knowledge of God and knowledge of self, which I think can be transposed into contemporary language in a way that's very helpful. But in terms of this question of her flexibility or lack thereof, her absolutism or lack thereof, I think what is perhaps a significant lesson for us today is that here is a person who was devoted to looking for God's will, who spent all her days in many hours of prayer and seeking to know what God wanted of her, who nevertheless uh, was unable to interpret some of her experience in a way that today, looking back, we can say was likely God's will. In other words, I think Matt is asking me about an article I wrote where I questioned some of her discernments. And historical information gives us the ability to do that. But what does that um, invite me to? That invites us to be aware that no matter how transformed we think we are, no matter how prayerful we think we need humility. That is the ability at the same time to recognize how we can be wrong, how we can misinterpret our beliefs, or how we can hang on to beliefs as being absolutely true when perhaps they're not, and invite us to not live our spirituality individualistically, but to actually be open to the wise counsel of some form of wise community around us and wise others who care about us. So I think I find that such a saint, such a person could be so wrong at times, invites us to these kinds of questions for today.
Terrific. Thank you. Here's my fourth question for you. I've known you as a really integral member of the IRC, so the International Relations Committee for the Society. Can you tell us about what the IRC does in the SSCS and what you've done specifically on the IRC?
Yes, so the International Relations Committee, IRC, was the idea of Bernard McGinn. And he is a great scholar of mysticism who was also a president of our society. That idea began to be implemented in 2014. I think the board approved it in 2015. And by then, it began to meet with a group of people. I was invited into it in 2016, and shortly thereafter was urged to be the chairperson of that committee. So, what the committee involved was having maybe 6 to 8 persons on it from different countries. So, during my 6.5 year tenure on the IRC, there were people from Korea, from China, from Australia, from South Africa, from Ireland, perhaps from Germany, perhaps other countries I'm leaving out. And the idea was to have the society that is mostly centered in the US have scholars from other countries uh, included in the discussion that we hold as a society in order to keep us alert to other developments in the world in the field of Christian spirituality. And the other goal of the IRC is to, in consultation with societies in other countries, try to, every so many years, perhaps hold a conference that's international. And so through the IRC, right at its beginnings, there was one in South Africa, then there was one in Switzerland, then one in Rome, then one in Australia. And I believe this year there is a meeting in Ireland of by invitation, I believe, of some of the leadership in IRC and or membership in IRC and leadership in the society. So yeah, that has been the story of IRC.
That's great. I missed that first conference in South Africa. I wasn't part of the SSCS yet, but I've been to the conferences in Switzerland and Rome and Australia, and I'm going to the one in Ireland too. I'm looking forward to it. So thank you
Great.
for your work, Deanna. It's been fantastic on the IRC. So here's my fifth and final question. So last time I saw you in person, we were in Boston at the conference of the American Academy of Religion. We were sitting across from each other at a in a restaurant at a dinner hosted by the SSCS. We were talking about how scholarship in the SSCS and really the field of Christian spirituality has kind of evolved over the last 2 or 3 decades. And we were talking about how 20, 30 years ago, a lot of the work in Christian spirituality had this kind of manifesto-like quality. It was defining the terms of the field and trying to explain what Christian spirituality was and how it fit into other disciplines and this kind of thing. And we were commenting on how that manifesto quality is a bit different now, perhaps a bit more subdued than it used to be. So I guess I'll ask you the question this way. What in the field, in the evolving scholarship, do you see that you like, and what do you wish you saw a bit more of?
Well, I think because of the time constraint of the length of answers here, I'll stick to what I'd like to see more of. How's that?
Sounds
And
good.
um, I think that our the theoretical structure of spirituality can be deepened and um, and strengthened if scholars of Christian spirituality studies were more conscious and explicit about methodology. So, what I mean by that is if I say, well, I'm going to study topic A, to explicitly and consciously ask the question, okay, what methods, what fields of study, and within those fields of study, what structures for information gathering and information analysis would apply to this topic, would best lead me to understand this topic. So to do that, and then to say why. Why have I chosen this? So to give an example with what we were just discussing regarding Catherine. So I am very aware, having lived in three different countries for significant periods of time, of how, and all three of them have a different, I'm a Roman Catholic, different expressions of Catholicism, how much context affects how you live your spirituality and how much culture and the way that a religion as international as Catholicism is interpreted in different countries can affect how you live your spirituality or how you understand your spiritual experience. So, having said that to myself and wanting to understand Catherine as much as possible, I realized that I would need to learn more about her cultural context. So, how are girls taught religion? How are they educated? What possibilities do women have? What was the spirituality at the time, for instance? And I realized, well, who studies that in depth? Well, medieval historians, because history of spirituality studies that only so far. But the people who study that in depth are medieval historians. So then I made a plan of research in medieval history to become really knowledgeable about many of these areas, not to do with Catherine herself, but with the context. And that actually was what allowed me to, for instance, get three of those articles out that gave me the possibility of interpreting Catherine in a new way. So that's what I would like to see more of in the field, more conscious and intentional reflection on what method am I using and why am I using it.
Terrific. Well, Deanna, thank you for your great work in society. I'm grateful as a scholar to you and also grateful for your friendship. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm very pleased to be here and talk with you, Matt.